Okay, folks, this is the training video for the UO Science and Invention Fair workshop number 2, which is all about developing research questions. I'm going to go over the vastly shortened vastly shortened workshop presentation for this, and cover the activity all in this same video. The activity is it's flexible because it has to be because we don't know exactly what the classroom will be like that you're in, but hopefully it will be a good space for doing paper airplanes. If not, well, we do the best we can. It's always an opportunity to talk about control. So in this workshop, we're tackling one of the most challenging aspects of putting together a science fair project for kids, which is one that we as adults and experienced scientists tend to overlook. But the importance of developing a testable research question. A lot of times kids kind of know the sort of what they want to do, and they have an idea of the subject or the things that they want to mess with and the things they want to do with them, but they don't really have an idea of what question they're asking, because a lot of them have done so many projects that are just like sort of regurgitate information, build cool diorama, that they don't understand that in this case the question really drives the whole experiment, and that's what we're trying to get at with this workshop. And some tips for developing good research questions. So first, do a quick review talking about this is all for our Science Invention Fair, and a science fair is a chance to ask and answer a question using the scientific method. A real quick review of the scientific method for last time. So we use it to ask a question about some sort of natural phenomenon, like what kind of objects are magnetic, what makes bread mold grow the fastest, and things like that. We do a little bit of investigation to find out more. Remember last time we shook our mystery boxes to see if we could figure out some more information about them, and we wrote down what we knew about our possible objects that were in our box. Then we hypothesized what we thought was in the box. Did we think it was a washer? Did we think it was a paperclip based on how it sounded and felt? I collapsed these into one, but that's okay. Then we designed our experiment. We actually wrote down the steps we were going to do. We were going to put the magnet on everything and record what we found out. We were going to weigh everything and record what we found out. We listened and compared the sounds of the different reference objects compared to what was in our mystery box, and wrote that all down. Then we looked at our data and we said, hey, well, what do the most of these tests seem to point to for what object it might be? And it wasn't always conclusive, because science isn't always conclusive. And then we shared out, we opened our boxes. Scientists love data. Candy's good too. You can do science fair projects with candy. So that's a quick review of the scientific method, just to kind of keep reminding them, because it's going to come back, especially in the presentation portion. You should organize your trifold board in the end, according to the scientific method. Although you can shape up the order on the board, because you really want to emphasize that data and analysis part. So we're actually going to look at different kinds of research questions today using paper airplanes. So we're going to start out with some sort of pre-formed questions for the kiddos to get them thinking about how a vague question can be made more specific. So our vague question is, how do different modifications change how our paper airplane flies? Well, and you can talk with the group. Well, what do we mean? What do we mean by modifications? What do we mean by how our plane flies? What are some different things we could test using this question? And how can we make this question better? So talk with the kiddos a little bit about what they, maybe modifications, a fancy word, just, changes that we can make to our paper airplanes. You might have some kids who are more paper airplane aficionados who can talk about some very specific ways you can change your paper airplanes. These are the supplies that they're going to have access to. They're going to have regular copier paper. They're going to have heavy size paper of the same size. They're going to have, we will have some tape. They don't really need that. We're going to have some paper clips. So these are the different supplies they have for testing the question. And these are the rules. Make sure to emphasize this. This is for a couple of reasons. One, to keep everybody from going batty, but also to make sure they actually get to keep their airplanes at the end. So it's really important that they write their name on their planes for two reasons. One, because we're going to collect them all up at the end of the activity, and they're going to get them back at the end of the day, and it would be nice if they actually got their plane back. So putting your name on it will help with that. But also, oftentimes we will be throwing planes in batches, and you want to be able to make sure you know which one is your plane, because sometimes they land really close to one another. There will be no throwing of planes outside the launch zone. If kiddos throw their planes at their desks, their planes get confiscated. There is a zero tolerance plane throwing policy. We throw only for science. We will only throw the planes not just where we are told, but when we are told. So don't just go to the launch zone and keep throwing airplanes around. All throws are for science today. And they will get their planes back at the end of the day. We're not going to let them keep them, especially if it's a morning session, because that will drive their teachers insane. And they'll just end up losing them. So we're going to we've already come up with some questions we can test, and hopefully they will come up with something similar to this in your discussion with them. Don't spend too much time discussing it, but they'll have come up with some stuff related to these questions. So the questions we're going to look at today are: how do fins change how a plane flies? How does paper weight change how far a plane might fly? Or how does adding a paper clip to the back, or actually they can add it to the front or wherever they want, how does adding a paper clip change how the plane flies? The handout for this is structured. It has these questions so they can actually, with a checkbox, pick which question they're asking in their pairs. Each person makes a plane, make the planes together, and each part of the worksheet is kind of structured to do a lot of little checkboxing, so there's not a whole lot of writing they have to do, but they should write some descriptions of how the plane flew. Get them in partners. It's best to have these in pairs. An odd group of 3 is just fine as well. That's fine. You can double test some stuff. But basically, everybody's going to fold the same plane. And depending on the age of your kids and just their personal experience, I've been surprised how many kids do not know how to fold paper airplanes. So have them pick their question, pass out the paper that they need, and fold this all together. Like, have one of you up at front showing them each fold, and one instructor and the teacher roaming around and helping kids who are having trouble, especially if some kids just don't have the manual dexterity to make nice clean folds, because a plane that isn't folded well will definitely affect how its flight goes. We're making a very simple dart, which is you fold it in half lengthwise, then you fold in the corners, then you fold in the corners again, you fold the whole thing in half, and you fold down the wings. How you fold down the wings is very much a personal style, but make sure to emphasize to the kids that the 2 partners fold their wings the same. They don't have to fold them exactly how we fold them, but they do need to make sure that their planes are pretty close together in design, otherwise we'll have a confounding factor in our experiment. So the procedure is pretty simple. Pick a question. Each person folds a plane on the type of paper appropriate for that, so you may have to flip back to that previous slide after you do this slide. I'll actually try to reorder that, before the workshop. Each person folds a plane out of the appropriate paper. Each person will get to throw their plane twice and make sure to record their data. And the data we want to record is how far the plane flew, in a straight line, but also the way it flew. Did it veer off to the right? Did it sort of nosedive and then even out? Did it fly up and then nosedive? Did it fly in sort of a loopy manner? Because depending on your question, the style of flight may be more important than the distance. So then after everybody's had a chance to fly, and it can be quite chaotic, try to discuss out with a group sort of some general findings. Okay, folks who did it on the plain paper and added fins, what did you find was difference between the finned and the non-finned plane? And of course the style of their fins are going to make a huge difference. Are there any trends that we noticed between the types of planes? And also encourage them to start digging into, like, what are some things that might complicate our data, that might make it hard to say how the difference in the plane actually affected how it flew? Because some things are going to be like, do we all throw paper airplanes very well all the time? No, we don't. Sometimes I flub throwing a paper airplane. Did we have to do it outside? Was there wind? That can really mess things up. I'll try to edit that out of the video. It's my mom calling me. Get into things like that, like things we could do a better job of controlling in the future. And a lot of this detail is in the curriculum for this activity. All right, so that's the bulk of the workshop, should be spent on the activity, but we do want to leave some time afterwards for talking about developing individual research questions for the kiddos. So we have 5 questions for your research question, which is to say, if you come up with a research question, how do you know if it's a good, viable research question? Well, one thing to do is to subject it to these 5 questions. So the first one is really simple. How will you measure your experiment? And I don't know how many times kids come up with questions that are simply not measurable. Like, how many Hot Wheels cars would it take to stack up to get to the moon? This is a bad question for 2 reasons. 1, because we can just look up how far the moon is away. 2, because the distance to the moon actually changes all the time. But 3, we can't possibly get enough Hot Wheels cars to do this. And even if we did, we can't stack them up. It's just not something that we can actually measure. So that's a really big first hurdle. How are you going to measure it? It may be that it is a very measurable question, but not within our means, within our time frame, and our resources. Then another really good question is, how long will the experiment take? Some experiments are a really good idea and they're totally doable, but we don't have enough time before the science fair to actually complete the entire experiment and have it ready in time for the fair. And I like these pictures are a good comparison because bean sprouts we can do in, a very short amount of time, within a few weeks, but growing a tree to full height, not so much. So if they are interested in growing living things, but the thing they want to grow is maybe not viable, we can steer them towards things like bean sprouts or radishes or Arabidopsis, which are things that grow very quickly. Also, don't forget when considering how long it's going to take, not just the time for the experiment itself, but how long it's going to take you to plan, to build and set up the experiment, to collect the data, and then make your presentation at the end. It is a very common case that kids go through and do a really good science experiment and then don't have enough time to put their display together, and their parents are freaking out Friday night before the fair trying to get this whole thing together and make it look good. So it's really important to emphasize to the kids to leave themselves time at the end to make a nice presentation because they want to show off their experiment to their best advantage. Then what materials you need, what supplies. If we're going to grow bean sprouts, we're going to need a pot, we're going to need potting soil, we're going to need the beans themselves, we're going to need a place to put them, we're going to need a notebook to record our data. Maybe if we're testing the effect of plant food, we're going to need plant food, we're going to need a watering can, all these sorts of things. So think about all the stuff that you need to carry out your experiment. And the next really important question is it interesting? So it's possible to have a science fair project that's very well thought out, that's very achievable, that's good, that we can do and present well. But if it's boring or something that's not interesting to you, I would strongly encourage the kiddos to try and pick something that they're interested in, because otherwise this is just going to be a boring slog, and science should be fun. So they should do something they think is interesting. And of course, is it safe? If it involves, climbing up high in trees without any sort of safety harness or laying on railroad tracks, these are things we don't want to do. Or if they're, they don't have very good dexterity and it's going to require a lot of fine cutting with an X-Acto knife, think about it, which doesn't mean if there is a potentially unsafe element in a project, it doesn't mean you have to scrap it right away. It just means, well, can I get an adult to help me? Is there something I can do to mitigate or make this experiment safer? So be thoughtful about your experiment. Don't necessarily rule it out right away, but do think about how you can make it safe. So, having gone over those 5 questions, if you still have time, get them into groups and have them write down a couple of ideas for a science project, share them out among the group, then, apply those 5 questions to the research questions that they have, and then pick 1 or 2 from the group to share out with the class that they think are good potential research project ideas. Just to get them doing some practice of applying these questions. And they don't necessarily have to write this all down or do a question from everyone, but it's a good activity as a group to think about, to get them thinking about how to do a research question. And then they can rewrite a question after they've gone over it to make it a little bit better. It just kind of depends on how much time you have. This is a really good activity to do. It's less fun than the airplanes, but it is good for getting them thinking about their science fair projects if you have time. Encourage them before you leave to try and refine and come up with an actual question, and that way they can start designing their experiment and come prepared to share what they want their project to be. And then, of course, don't forget, science rocks! So that's workshop 2. There are some good pointers in the curriculum for how to carry out the airplane activity. It can be challenging to control a classroom of 30 kids with paper airplanes in their hands, so make sure to communicate really clearly with them your expectations for where and when things are going to happen, and just have a bit of tolerance for a bit of chaos or running around and helping kids refold planes and answering their questions, and try to keep an attentive eye to making sure that every kid gets to throw a plane, because every once in a while a kid gets left out and then they're really upset, and we don't want that. But mostly kids have a lot of fun with this activity, and hopefully it does get them thinking about how to frame a science fair project, because it is conceptually kind of challenging when you're not familiar with this format. All right, thanks a lot, folks.